welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. I'm Greg Norman, your host. We are fortunate enough today to have Brian Geraghty, who is a Detroit area sailor and a representative for U.S. Sailing on the Offshore Committee. First of all, Brian, I wanted to say thank you for taking the time. You are in Florida, if I'm not mistaken, at this point?
That is correct.
So it's nice and warm down there, and while it was warm here yesterday, I looked out my window this morning and it's still snowing again. So we're facing some interesting weather changes.
Well, that happens in March, and that's why we're here.
Well, Brian, the easiest way for us to have a conversation is before we get to some scholarship things we want to talk about and quite a bit of the adjective racing discussion that we're going to be a part of. You started in Philadelphia, ended up at Drexel, came to the Detroit area and worked for Ford for a long time. I guess the first question and the easiest question is, how'd you get involved in sailing? Where did it start?
Well, my uncle had 3 kids, one of which was my age, and we had a little lake in Pennsylvania that he used to fish in, and he bought a little sailboat, a Moth. And my cousin and I would go out into this lake, and of course, lakes surrounded by woods, generally the wind stops a lot, so he'd come out and get us. But it was a lot of fun. I started with that. When I graduated, I bought a 19-foot day sailor and elevated myself through a 24 and a 29. And now I have a 35-foot boat, which I've had for a long time, but I really enjoy CNC 35. We race one design, and it's just a good way to meet good people and have a lot of fun.
You also have completed, I believe, 40 Mackinacs, if I'm not mistaken?
40 Bayview and 8 Chicago.
That's a lot of sailing. So it's become a lifelong avocation, to say the very least. Am I correct?
Well, it's a good way to get people. I have people fly in from Texas and Rhode Island just for the Bayview Mackinac race. People I haven't seen in a while. It's a great way to connect.
Well, let's start then and get kind of into the meat of the discussion. You are a representative of U.S. Sailings and the Offshore Committee, and maybe you can kind of explain a little bit exactly what that is and what it does.
Well, the U.S. Sailing is one of the world representatives, a national representative for world sailing, which is the entire world organization. As such, we manage all of the sailing that goes on in the United States. By manage, I mean we help people do whatever they'd like to do. So, for instance, we have performance handicap fleets where there's 60 or 70 different freestanding organizations, and we try and coordinate them with what they do for a handicapping, and also helping them out how to run races and providing training for them so they can run a race or run a protest according to a consistent way. We also do safety at sea, which is the training that we have to give people a better confidence when they're in the water. When you have the Coast Guard life jackets on your boat, that's just life jackets. You got to know how to use them, when to use them, what to do when you get into a storm. And then we have kind of the upper level racing. There's about 12 or 1,400 boats that really don't like the performance handicap. They like a calculated handicap, and we manage that process also.
As an arbiter of rules, how contentious are sailors?
All sailors want to win, and all believe that their boat was not necessarily given a fair rating. And so they push the envelope, and we show them the envelope, and we say, here are the rules, and we have different rules you can compete in. If you're an average sailor, likes to race maybe once or twice a month, maybe performance handicapping is good for you. If you're somebody that does ocean racing, you'll really need a VPP or a velocity prediction program run by ORR, ORC, or IRC, which are the 3 major in the United States.
Explain those adjectives so we maybe, for those who don't understand what all that stuff
So
means.
there's Velocity Prediction Profile is actually a program that was started in the 70s at MIT. And that program would take the physical characteristics of the sails and the hull and do hydrodynamic and aerodynamic calculations to determine if a 40-foot boat and a 30-foot boat start a race at the same time, and the 30-foot boat is 10 minutes behind at the finish, did he beat the 40-foot boat or not? Because did he perform his best? And that's what VPP or velocity prediction profiles do. So that is for the 11 or 1,200 boats that we have. So somebody can go out in a race, and just because they don't have the biggest boat in the fleet, they still have a chance of winning the race.
Thinking, I guess you could think of it as golf handicapping. Golf handicap
Well,
index would be similar.
Golf handicapping, no. Bowling handicapping, no. Performance
Okay.
handicapping or perf would be analogous to golf handicaps, if you will. But these are par.
Okay.
Velocity prediction profile, you should be able to get a 3 par in this hole. Just because you got a 5, we don't really care. You should have to get a 3.
All right.
Performance, if you got a 5 and you consistently got a 5, we'll give you a 2 for your handicap for that hole. And if you get a 5, you might beat the guy that had a 3.
So there's obviously science behind these discussions and these formulas that come up with your ratings, right?
Oh, yes. There's aerodynamic and hydrodynamic. Aerodynamic for the sails, and that's for power and also drag, and then resistance from the hull through hydrodynamics or the water that passes under the hull. You put it together and you say you have a certain wind speed, you have a certain wave condition, and we've been pretty good being able to calculate whether the 30-foot boat, the 40-foot boat, well sailed, can meet at the finish line exactly at the same time. Calculated.
This may seem like a novice question, but I'm curious. Does a 35-year-old boat and a new boat of the same make have the same rating, or is there a part of that formula that accounts for age?
There are boats that have been made probably not that long, but let's use 10 years for an example. If they're designed exactly the same, they get exactly the same rating. But my 35-foot boat, which was designed in the 1970s, and another 35-foot boat that was designed in 2010, the 2010 boat would have many features that would make it go faster. And so it would get a handicap that would be faster, and I would get a kind of an allowance that if I came in behind it, I could still beat it by the allowance.
Do a lot of engineers, I would think, would be the largest group of complainers towards rules of sailing because they understand the technical aspects. But my guess is, and again, I'm just a novice idea, is that probably most of the arguments come from non-engineering kind of guys who probably should just not open their mouths and just go about the business of sailing.
Well, I'll give you a guess, but mostly lawyers are the ones that complain.
Yeah.
And the engineers, you usually can shut them down with a couple of, did you do this and did you do that? Well, okay, I agree. Lawyers will go to the death for 3 seconds a mile.
How often do you update these kinds of formulas? Is that a yearly process?
Oh, it's actually every couple of months. Something new in technology comes up, especially today with foiling. These are boats that actually raise out of the water and foil. Tremendous difference in speed. Just with 1 or 2 miles an hour in wind speed, you can go from 8 or 9 knots to 25 knots. Those kind of things. And then the boats in the 70s, when my boat was designed, are more a full bottom and a kind of a V, and their hulls are a bulbous shape. Now the boats are more flat-bottomed and more of an arrow shape, very pointed. So the technology changes, and when somebody new comes out, we have to see how that does relative to the older design. So it's constantly taking a look. We have some boats, for instance, we had a boat last year that when you put up some sails, the boat was so tender or so tippy that and 15 or 20 miles an hour of wind, if it had its regular sails up, it'd fall over, it'd blow over. It was meant to have those sails up when it was blowing 4 knots instead of 24 knots. So there's lots of different things you have to take a look at when you do the design for the handicap system.
Now, we should point out that offshore is anything saltwater or freshwater. If you can't see shore, it's an offshore, which is part of the committee. So it would obviously take in the Mackinac races in Chicago to Mackinac and anything where you can't see shore.
Well, that's true, but we also go a little bit backwards because we do boats down to about 20 to 25 feet that may have a race that goes maybe 15 or 20 miles. You might be in a lake like around Detroit where they have Lake St. Clair, where if you're in the middle, you can always see a little chunk of shore, but it's far enough away. By offshore, we mean it's far enough away you can't get back to a port very quickly.
There's an old adage in sports in general: if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And I'm just wondering what you thought percentage of sailors that are trying to fudge from time to time. You think that's something that is a pretty common process in the sailing world?
Well, it's not something that is too common, because when you're in I grew up in the car world, and so we had cars that would race in NASCAR and different things, and they would show up, and a technical guy would make sure the seat belts were in, you had a roll bar that was correct, and they were on their way. Sailboat racing is very different. We weigh the boats. We do not only weighing, but we also see where the center of gravity is, because you could have two boats weigh the same, have the center of gravity much lower. And so we understand where that is. We also take a look at the technology in the sails, and you get what's called a full measurement. It takes almost a day and a half to get a full measurement. And so that tries to get rid of the cheaters. But if there's always somebody out there. We have people that were putting things on or taking things off when they were moved. They got weighed, and then they moved out to the race course. And those people are excluded from sailing for 5 years, 1 year for life, depending on how egregious the situation is. But everybody is invited onto other people's boats. People usually come in and say, you have, my boat has furniture, it has a kitchen, can I see your boat? You get down below, you see that they have all the stuff. So it's more of an open kind of a situation, where people at the end of the race, even at the beginning of the race, invite you onto the boat so you can see what's going on. So there's less of that. I'm sure there's a little bit of it, but I want to think that it's more a Corinthian sport, where we're there to have fun. We're there to see how we do. We're not there to cheat.
I was a basketball and a college official and a high school official for a long time. And between high school and college, there's 20% rule changes. And between college and pros, there's another 20%. The guy who watches a football game on Sunday can watch a football game and doesn't understand how, when he goes down on Friday night to watch a high school game, how rules are interpreted differently. And usually the farther down you go, the rules are set up for safety. But the truth of the matter is, and this is the question, is that what percentage of sailors do you really think understand all the things that you've just been talking about? You think you have a pretty good understanding, or do you think that we should do a better job of teaching?
Well, I'll give you my 11 to 1,200 people that use the VPP systems. They usually are quite involved in understanding everything. They're very involved with safety. As you move towards the person that bought a boat last summer, I was back on it 3 times, and taking friends out for the sunset cruises. No, they're not as much involved, and we're trying to get them involved in safety and teaching as much as possible. Want to tell them that a Coast Guard certification is interesting. They check that you have the equipment, but they don't check that you know how to use it. And so what we do is we try and say, you have equipment on your boat, let us show you how to use it. And that's a challenge that we have that's constant, and we think it's a great challenge.
Now, offshore also concludes with lots of safety, and you guys are involved in those kinds of processes. So talk a little bit about the safety issues that you handle as a committee.
Well, we have something called Safety at Sea, which is a course, and it starts out, you can take a 4-hour online course. I think it's $30 or $40. You take a test, and so you get a rating. You can take an 8-hour test. It's a little more comprehensive. You can also go to a lecture where you'll be there for 8 hours and have an interaction with the instructor. You can then move to a two-day session, the second day of which is actually hands-on in the water, putting fires out with fire extinguishers, firing flares off, very, very hands-on, and you get to have that for your rating system. A lot of races, the 11 or 1,200 people that are using the VPPs, and some perf organizations require that you have a certain number of people in your boat that have this very good training. That's not to exclude bringing your 16-year-old onto a race that maybe hasn't done something, but the dad knows, the uncle knows, and so they're able to watch out and understand for that. The Safety at Sea training is in longstanding, and now that we have online courses, it's much more open to all of the United States. We had an introduction about 2 or 3 years ago of an online course, and we tripled the number of people that had taken that course versus the course that they had to go somewhere and they had to spend a weekend or a night somewhere. And that facility makes it a lot better and a lot broader. We're trying to do more of that.
Do you think cruisers should take a note and maybe pick up on some of the issues that racers understand about safety? Because I don't get the impression that racers take it as seriously. Cruisers don't take it as seriously.
Well, cruisers, a lot of cruisers, I mean, there's a friend of mine, he, up until his age 55, he had never stepped on a sailboat. He retired, bought a sailboat, spent 3 years, and his entire target was to sail around the world with his wife. And after 3 years, they got into what's called a rally. This is where about 50 boats sail around the world in chunks of time, and they're very involved with safety. That's one end of the spectrum. The other is the fellow that bought the boat last year and goes out for sunset cruises. So there's a wide variety, just like there is in racing. Some cruisers actually have a lot more safety equipment than the racers because they're not so concerned about weight. They might have 2 life rafts on board instead of just one. They might have twice as many jackets. They might have all kinds of flares. It's all individualistic.
From a time frame as a volunteer, give us an idea how much time you spend in a year on this kind of a committee. I'm assuming it takes a great deal of work on your part as a volunteer.
Well, yes, it takes, well, I'm retired, so time is one of my features that I have. For instance, we just spent 4 days out in San Diego. We have a conference out there called the Leadership Conference. There's not only the Offshore Committee, but there's different committees. There's 6 major focus that they had that they discussed. How do we get juniors going? How do we have improved safety? What safety problems have we had? So that's 4 days, and an airplane ride and a couple of nights in a hotel. Then we have at least 4 meetings a year, and they're all video, GoToMeeting or WebEx. And they take, the meeting itself takes, maybe an hour or 2 each time. But preparation for the meeting might take 2 or 3 days of working with various people to make sure the papers are done. And this is not just for me. The committee is consisting of 8 people. And all of those folks are involved, especially Sally Honey, who does just a tremendous amount of work on safety at sea.
I asked the question because Bruce Burton, we just interviewed, who is the Olympic Sailing Committee Director for U.S. Sailing. The Olympics has obviously been canceled, and all of a sudden you've got all of this work and logistics and issues, and it's a volunteer job, but it becomes full time sometimes. So I don't know that all of us appreciate how much work goes down behind the scenes for whether it's setting handicaps or making rules, but there's lots that goes into this whole process.
Well, U.S. Sailing, of course, is our national authority, and that's another leg, if you will, of U.S. Sailing. But they have not only a volunteer problem, but they have a fundraising problem. And there's the Olympic Committee of the United States and the Olympic Committee, I guess it's the International Olympic Committee. They have allocation of funds, and then there's people who have to fundraise within the United States. And we've been doing that, and Bruce has quite a challenge in getting that money. I know he's working very hard and has had some success. And now you have a situation where the money that was supposed to last for 4 years has to last for 5 years. And, all the things you did in preparation to go, just a few weeks from now over to Japan, all of that has to happen again. And so that'll be another challenge that we had. And then, of course, there's people that had their lives on hold. They graduated from college and they were preparing to go for the Olympics. They don't have a job. They have a job sailing their boat and qualifying around the world in different world events, and they're going to have to put that off for another year. So that's a big challenge that they have in the Olympics. And while it's been canceled, it's actually been postponed. So right. if you go to Japan for 2021, you will get a 2020 Olympic shirt.
Is that right?
Yes.
I know he mentioned that the weather patterns, it's going to start one day earlier or one day later. I'm not sure, but it basically in the same time frames. But the reality to it is even by his own admission, U.S. Sailing is not at the top of the chain when it relates to fundraising for its own specific activity, because it's not one of those mainstream sports that has it's not spectator. It's not a spectator sport. So when you have
Well,
to
there's actually a more important feature. It's not a nationally funded organization. So in I think year 2000 was the last year that it had to be kind of amateur, if you will, kind of amateur.
Right.
And in 2004, it was opened up, and people in the Netherlands, New Zealand, I'm trying to think, there's 2 or 3 other countries, but Australia, they put huge chunks of government money to pay people a salary to be involved with the sailing, and they started to walk away with all the good prizes. Now, in the United States, there are some companies, for instance, Home Depot. Home Depot employs people, and they give them time off. So they employ them, if you will, and then if they have to go to a regatta, they don't get paid for that time, but at least they have a job, they have health care and those kinds of things. And so companies are stepping up, but they're not giving them the kind of salaries that our friends overseas are giving to them. So that's big challenges for fundraising. We have to do it privately, and other areas do it, other countries do it with government money.
These Germans used to have their weightlifters and their shot put guys would work as security guards. One of the things that Bruce mentioned was that you got to be at a national, international level, you got to be in a boat 200 days a year. Well, if you're sailing 200 days a year, you're a professional. You're not a part-time sailor. That's a pretty serious burden to put on somebody. And if you have to be in the boat that often to get that kind of ability, they really are professional sailors. But we've got to do a better job of figuring out a way to fund them, certainly.
Yeah, well, it's not only on the water, but they have to travel. So, for instance, the last Olympics in Brazil, I was involved peripherally. And do you have 1 boat, 2 boats, 4 boats, each individual guy? So, for instance, if you're in Miami, that's your home base, and you're sailing, and you have to get your boat down to Brazil, you put it on a container ship that takes 2 weeks. You go without your boat for 2 weeks. These boats cost $20,000-$30,000. They're the small ones, right. And they're going to have a class for 35-foot boats, which are going to cost over $100,000. And how many of those do you have to ship the one down to Brazil and then also ship one to Europe so you can do the guys in England, in Germany, and Australia, they have those extra boats.
Right.
All they have to do is bring their sails.
I think if people walk into my garage, we come out of the USSA ski world, somebody'd walk in the garage and they'd see, 30 pairs of skis. I've got one son who raced, and I was a coach, and they said, "What's all the skis for?" Well, you have to have a pair for trainers, and you have to have a pair for warm up, and you have to have a pair for slow snow and a pair for fast snow. It's not the cost of a sailboat, I understand, but it's athletics at that level is expensive, and it's going to be interesting to see if we can rebound and hopefully, raise the money and do the things we need to do.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think in Brazil we had 6 disabled and 10 regular classes, and I think we supported 6 of the regular classes and 2 of the disabled, and because that's where we had the focus. Now we had people that were United States folks that represented us in the other classes, but they didn't get the support. They had family support, but they didn't get the kind of support that they could train and do the things they needed for the 200 days on the water.
Okay. I want to bring the conversation back a little bit to Southeastern Michigan. You're involved in a scholarship for high school seniors or recent graduates. Maybe you can explain a little bit about your scholarship fund.
We have the Grosse Pointe Youth Nautical Education Foundation, which is open to graduating seniors from Detroit area, which would include Pontiac down to Toledo, all the DRYA or the Detroit region. It also includes Canadian clubs. But they would either in their senior year in high school or any of their years in college, they could apply one time for a scholarship of $1,500. This year, we will be giving out our 100th scholarship with the class that we have, and we currently have 13 that are vying for the scholarships. and they're kids that may have started when they were 10 years old, 8 years old, or they may have started halfway through high school. And we have a scoring system that we use based on academics, and we have an essay that they write, and we also have their participation and leadership. We give points for each one of those and then rank them. And we have a cutoff sometimes. Sometimes we have enough money, but we have some people that have fully funded a scholarship. I think we have 6 or 8 of those. And then we have people who come to a party that we had called, it's Grosse Pointe Yacht Club has it, and it's you can buy a 1-year scholarship. And so we have a well-funded, well-managed group of people that work with the DRA, the Detroit Regional Yacht Racing Association, and get these kids to put their names in. And we have a fun event, and we have a nice awards party, which I hope we can have this year. It's in May, and we'll have to see what the governor of Michigan allows us to do.
In order to apply for this, do you have to be either a high school sailor or a junior sailor, or is it open to anybody that sails? I'm assuming it's competitive sailing.
No, it's actually we have sailors that are very competitive, but you're not allowed to use competitive information. So you could be the person that finishes last and had the most fun, but you participated. That's the important part that we have. In fact, we have a unique element of the situation that we have, because in college sailing, unlike basketball, football, if you got a scholarship in high school, or if you got a scholarship, excuse me, from an organization to attend college, you are not allowed to sail in college sailing. But if you got a scholarship in football to go to University of Michigan, you can play football. But if you have a scholarship from anybody for sailing and you get $1,000, $10,000, whatever dollars it would be, sailing in intercollegiate sailing is not allowed. So what we do is we do not give any awards based on their ability to sail, but their participation and their scholarship.
That's the NCAA's 7,000-page rule book.
Great. Way beyond that. I baffled you with my acronyms, and you just baffled me with your 7,000 rule.
Well, the NCAA we have recruiting rules when from recruiting a college. There's just all kinds of things that don't make sense. But that's probably why that fits. There was, did you ever see the movie Hoosiers?
Oh, yeah.
There's several ball players that were in that movie that played secondary parts that were given $3,000-$4,000 for the summer to be bit actors and background guys.
Yeah.
When they went back to college to play at the Division III school they were at, or the Division II school they were at, the NCAA ruled them ineligible because the rule says you cannot make money at the craft at which you are good at. So the argument was that one of the guys had a dad who was a lawyer who sued, and it turned out that the craft he was practicing was art, not basketball, and they gave him his money back and do the rest of it. But sometimes the rules don't make a lot of sense, and I get that.
And this is why we are very careful about that. We want to get these kids to sail competitively in college if they wish, but we want to get them the money to help them in college.
Okay. Now, what I'll do at the end of the show is I'll put up. You can send me the information. We'll put when is the scholarship deadline? Is that already passed?
It has passed for this year, but it is always the first Monday in April.
Okay. We can at least put some information up, and it's through the name again, the Grosse Pointe
Youth Nautical Education Foundation, and Arpseski is actually the administrator of that.
Okay. We'll at least put that information up with some background, and we'll try to follow up next year to make sure that get a little more publicity off of it. So that's a great opportunity. I'd like to switch gears one more time if we could. You are a veteran, 40-year, we mentioned at the top of the show, 40 Mackinaws. There is, with the pandemic we're in, a decent chance that the race may find some difficulty being raced and run. San Diego Bay at the moment can't even put a boat on it. So it's a tough point right now for sailors. And then if they don't run the race, How do you change the name, which has the word continuous in it as part of its moniker?
Well, as I mentioned in a note that I sent to you, the nice thing that we have to promote our race is it's the longest continuously running freshwater long distance race. And that was really one of the main elements because in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, everybody was sitting around saying, are we going to be able to sail? Are we going to be able to do this? And they wrote the President of the United States. And the response from his office was, yes, we want you to sail. We want things to be as normal as possible. And so we ran races for the entire World War II. And of course, it started after World War I. Of course, it ran through the Vietnam War and the Korean War. Other organizations stopped running races for whatever reason here or there. So I am the club historian for Bayview Yacht Club, and I have written to the folks that are in charge of the race. And I said, I really hope you run the race. And I got a very strong agreement that that's what they're going to try and do with whatever regulations are in place. So for instance, one of the regulations in place right now is you can go out in a boat as long as you have only family members. That's today. So if you want to go fishing with your son, he lives in your house, that's allowed. If you want to go fishing with your next door neighbor, that's not allowed at this point up until April 30th. So under the worst conditions, we can have a family race that starts in Port Huron, run by boats that are populated by family members. There will be the start line, and we'll have some people on the island who are family people.
Right.
They finish the race. If the harbor's closed, they'll turn around and come back to Michigan, to Port Huron and back to Bayview. If we have two boats, it's a race. That's the worst situation. The best situation is they will agree that we're trying to get something to be normal. This is a good thing. It'll be July. It'll be nice to have something normal out there. And that's our fondest hope. But
Right.
one way or the other, I think we're going to have a race. Even if we can't land in Mackinac Island, it will be to Mackinac Island.
Is Mackinac first or Chicago first this year?
Mackinac, Bayview is first this year.
Okay. I think there would be some distinct advantage with some family names that we could probably both name that would have some serious talent, top to bottom in a family, versus somebody like my family who my 90-year-old mother would be on the tiller. So you have to, it would change the premise. But there'd be some pretty competitive families that would race in this if
Well, I mean, that would be legal today.
Yeah.
Now we're hoping that gets moved away. And I was making kind of lightheartedly, but that is a way that you can conduct the race. You would never land. You wouldn't land
right.
in Mackinac Island if that was a restriction. You would have family members on the boat, which is a current restriction, and just need a couple of people to start the race. Some people on the island to wave a flag and take your time, and that's all you need.
There would certainly we're not
run the race.
There would be no party on Friday night, that's for sure, in Port Huron. That would all have to go. But I'm pretty sure that's going to have, some of that stuff's going to have to go by the wayside anyway.
Yeah.
The way we are now. I mean, the new normal is what it is. But hopefully they can figure out a way to make that work. And
well, I mean, they're going to have a vaccine. So if it's not 2020, it's 2021, or we'll figure a way to get back to what I'll call the new normal.
Are you scheduled to race in your 41st this year?
Yes, I am.
Are you hoping to get to 50, if I could be nosy?
Well, that's a plan. I'm 74 years old now, and that's my plan.
Okay. I turned 66 this summer, and I'm still coaching, and I thought when I was 35, there was no way I'd be coaching into my retirement years, and I can't even imagine not coaching. So life looks different when you're looking at it from the time that you're in it. So it is.
Well, as you probably get, I get an array of little notes from various friends about things. And today I got one about a movie called The Mule. And you may have seen that. And of course,
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood.
And Clint was in the little movie, it said, he was having a drink with his friend, and his friend said, well, what are you going to do tomorrow? And he says, I'm 88 years old. Tomorrow I'm going to make a movie. And 88 seems kind of young to me right now. So that's my plan.
Good. I always end this with these conversations. I kind of end them with just a very simple question. What is it that ignites your blood, ignites your mind, and just what's you're explaining to a Martian what sailing meant to you? What would you tell him?
Well, it's friendship. It's getting together with people that enjoy a common challenge, that understand that if you don't do your job, the boat doesn't move. So they're very committed to do their job. They understand their job. And afterwards, we all relish in the fact that we beat somebody because we did our jobs better than they did their jobs.
Ryan, I appreciate the discussion today. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for good things for port here in the Mackinac. I can't tell you what a delightful conversation this was. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thanks for thinking of it.